We're in the third reading cycle of Sundays, and that means we're in Luke. And yet today, we don't have a reading from Luke, we have a reading from the Gospel of John. Already that should make us wonder what's going on. Why would we do that? We know Mark has a lot of John, actually, because Mark is so short, it's hard to cover the whole year. But here, Luke has plenty of stories. So what is it about this story that makes it fitting for today? We know this is really, though it's the second Sunday of ordinary time, this is the first Sunday of the ordinary cycle. And just last week, we had the conclusion of the Christmas cycle with Jesus' baptism, the final event in his epiphany, really, of his being made manifest. And so it is interesting that today we have the gospel taken from John from the very first public appearance of Jesus. All we have had so far is that beautiful prologue that begins, "In the beginning was the Word." Then we had Jesus' own baptism, and then the call of the disciples. That's chapter 1. Here we are at the very beginning of the second chapter. But we also have to think about, why is John so different from the others? Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptics, can be read in some ways together. But John comes a little later in its formation, according to most scholars, and is clearly more spiritualized, more theologized, and he's really driving towards clearer and more certain points. John's whole gospel is built around 7 signs, not miracles as they're called in the other gospels, though they are often miraculous, but signs. And we know that they're 7 because he points them out. He said, "I'm doing this." And he concludes right at the very end of the gospel, at the very tail end of the original ending, the short ending of the gospel. There were other stories tacked on afterwards. But this concluding statement in chapter 20, "But these signs are written, that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through this belief you may have life in his name." These 7 signs were put together by John, or at least told in such a way, for us to come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. What were the final words that I read in the gospel? This was the first of the signs given by Jesus. It was given at Cana in Galilee. He let his glory be seen, and his disciples believed in him. The story as we read it is complete. It's the whole story from the second chapter of John, except for the incipit, the 3 words that introduce it. It's fine, we do this all the time. In the Jerusalem Bible, which is the translation we read here in Ireland, it said 3 days later. But every other translation into English says something different. Not 3 days later, but on the 3rd day. For those of us who are Christians, we already pick up with on the 3rd day. We have a reference to the 3rd day, Jesus' resurrection. But John is writing to Jews in Jerusalem. He's writing to people who already believe and know the Old Testament. And those 3 words, though we didn't read them today, those 3 words set the scene for what is coming in a way we don't understand. Across the Old Testament, God's glory is revealed on the 3rd day, but it begins really in Exodus in 19, when God appears on Mount Sinai to meet with Moses. He appeared on the 3rd day. And twice it mentions Specifically, that on that day, the glory of God was on display. The very final words I read from the gospel tonight said, "This is the first of the signs given by Jesus. It was given at Cana in Galilee. He let his glory be seen." The signs in the Gospel of John point to who Jesus is, that he acts with the divine mission, that he is of God, not just as any of us are God, but that he is the one for whom they were waiting. On the third day, Exodus reads, "The Lord will come down Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. And then on the morning of the third day, great peals of thunder and lightning, heavy clouds over the mountains, a loud blast as of the ram's horn, the shofar. The people trembled. The mountain itself was enveloped with smoke because God came in fire, and the mountain trembled violently." A great theophany, a great manifestation of who God is on the third day. And here we have, in the gospel we read today, at the beginning of the Gospel of John, trying to point out who Jesus was, we hear that this manifestation happened on the third day. They would have heard, these Jewish listeners, these Jewish readers, that God is about to be made present. And then what happens? In the setup of the story, it's not about Jesus. It's about Mary. Somebody was getting married, probably a relative of Mary, and the mother of Jesus was there. Oh, Jesus and the boys were there too. We get that secondarily, but the mother of Jesus was there, and it was Mary who noticed that they were out of wine. A wedding in this time period went on for days. To run out of wine would have been embarrassing at best and catastrophic for the party. They ran out of wine, she says to Jesus, and he says, "Woman, what is this to do with me? Why turn to me?" We hear the woman as somewhat offensive. In his day, it wouldn't have been. Just, "Woman, what is this to do with me? Why turn to me? My time has not yet come." Jesus has not begun his public ministry. But it is through the intercession of Mary. It is through Mary who recognized a human need in the situation in which they were. It is with Mary who had pondered the reality of who Jesus was from the time Jesus was announced to her by the angel Gabriel, through Anna, the prophetess in the temple when she came to dedicate him, to this meeting Jesus had as a 13-year-old boy in the temple, impressing the scholars of his day with his knowledge, pondering in her heart what all of this must mean. It is Mary who inaugurates the ministry of Jesus. They have no wine. Fascinating what happens then. Jesus has them fill 6 ceremonial ablution jars, giant stone jars. Not clay, stone, expensive, non-porous. But again, people of Jesus' day, the people to whom John was writing, would have known. In Jewish ceremonies, there were 7 jars, not 6. Across the Old Testament, water is seen as a reference to the law. When Jesus takes 6 stone ceremonial jars, customary for their ablutions, for their washing, and creates wine, people hearing this for the first time would have seen the law being replaced, would have seen the 6 jars become 7 in the person of Jesus, and then the new wine of the new covenant, replacing the old law, that there is now a new dispensation in the person of Jesus. All of this sets up all that is to come. In the Gospel of John and in the history of Jesus. We will not hear or see Mary again in the Gospel of John until she is standing at the foot of the cross. The first disciple and the first intercessor. She becomes the loyal disciple together with the beloved disciple John, who are the core of the new church that is founded. All is made new in Jesus. And the bridegroom, the one who would have been embarrassed, has been replaced by the heavenly bridegroom, the bridegroom of the messianic banquet, that same banquet that we heard spoken of in our first reading. When Israel is coming back from captivity, and the prophet Isaiah is proclaiming, "You are no longer forsaken, you are no longer abandoned, you are now my delight. You are the wedded. You are the ones who now are unified with God in what is most closely resembles a marriage covenant. As the bridegroom rejoices in his bride, so will your God rejoice in you." All of this would have come to mind to those people in Jerusalem who heard John's version of what is happening at the wedding feast of Cana. What's that mean for us? We are part of that church founded by John and Mary, founded by Christ, but built upon the witness of the apostles and Our Lady. We are called to participate in that church as if we're married to God, as if we take the bridegroom as our own, and we allow ourselves to be filled with his love, transformed by his grace, and become his voice, his hands in our world. Each of us will do it differently, as we hear in this beautiful second reading from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. Some will be preachers, some will be teachers, some will be healers, some will prophesy, some will interpret. Each of us will do something different. But each of us must take our part in making manifest that heavenly wedding, making manifest the gift of the bridegroom, living fully the life of the Spirit we have been given, that the love of God might become ever more palpable through us, just as through John, through us as signs. Others should come to know Christ and believe that he is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through that belief may come to have life in his name.